Welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Best Deer Hunting Stories of 2019. On almost every show, we ask each guest to share a memorable deer story that is meaningful to them. At the heart of the Big Buck Registry are the stories of the men and women across the world from all walks of life that share a common bond in hunting. We've always felt that the story was just as important as the rest of the show because it brings everything together. If the rest of the show is the textbook, the story is the example. The story brings the hunt to life. So we decided to go back through each show and put together a compilation of the deer stories told throughout the year and share them collectively. Here in part 2, we'll hear from Jeff Johnston, Scott and Seth Perkins, Richard Cook, Anthony Stallone, Harmon Carson, Allison Rauscher, and Phil Vanderpool. This is part 2 in our last episode of 2019. Cheers to a healthy, prosperous, and successful 2020. Let's get right into it and pick up where we left off in part 1.
Number 7.
Starting with number 7, Jeff Johnston from Trophy Scan and episode 290.
Well, I've one that comes to mind, and it's a fairly long one, so brace yourself.
Okay.
But I was probably 17 years old. I remember that because I was driving at the time. I was here in Oklahoma, and there had been a deer that was spotted. I live on a county road, and rumors fly. Most of my neighbors hunt and all, but we all have a little bit of land, and people talk. Well, there was a deer that was spotted that was a double drop time buck that was probably in the 190 class, pushing 200 inches for just this giant typical frame, 14 points, double drop times, just a giant deer. Most counties and places in the U.S. on your bigger buck states have legends like this, but he became a legend here because for 3 years in a row, my neighbor in the summer had videotaped him in his alfalfa field, but nobody had ever seen him in the hunting season. And you didn't base your season around this deer that we called General, real creative, right? But you always had him in the back of your mind. And we had seen him, he was filmed miles away in the summer, so we knew he ranged for miles and never really knew. Well, anyway, day I was hunting, I was 17. It was about noon, and I was coming out disgusted. I hadn't seen really much anything, but I was coming out, and I was at my gate, coming out to the county road. And I don't know your philosophy, but when I'm really peak of the rut and really buck hunting, I won't take my deer, my does on my favorite, stands. I'll, try to get them in a little bit more convenient places if I can. I love to shoot a doe or two for the meat and for conservation and all that. So anyway, I was at the gate. I got out of my truck to open the gate, and I looked over, and there's a doe standing right there. And in my mind, I'm like, well, heck, it's noon. I'm gonna go get a hamburger. I could have this doe loaded up in my truck in 30 seconds and be away. So perfect. So abiding the game laws, I slipped open the truck door, grabbed my 308, pulled it out, and miraculously the doe was still standing there. Well, I raised the rifle and put her in my loophole scope and just about to pull the trigger when in the lower left portion of my scope, we've got what I call broom sage or buffalo grass in Oklahoma. It's about 3 feet tall, real khaki colored. I could see this antler tine, and then it was above it, and sure enough, it was a buck. And I lowered the scope down and down some more, and there was antlers everywhere. And about that time, and the doe was standing up looking at me wide-eyed, getting ready to break, but she was seeing what I was going to do. She was frozen. This buck, though, was just sitting there. It couldn't see me. It could just hear my truck, but it was totally keying off the doe. And then I looked at it, and it rotated its head, and I could see these double drop tines and just a giant deer, biggest deer to this day that I've ever seen on free range. I've hunted everywhere from all the big buck areas in Illinois and everywhere else. And this was a true giant deer. Well, I couldn't see his chest or even really neck area. And I just didn't want to shoot through the grass without being able to see vitals. So, okay, I've got my finger on the trigger. my gun off safety and I'm holding it up. So all I got to do is wait and the buck is mine and he's only 35 yards away. So about that time, the doe finally can't stand it. She breaks, bounds off, and I know something's about to happen. Well, about that time, in one bound, this deer got up from where he was laying. He was obviously tending the doe, like, breeding the doe, or they had been. He jumps behind a cedar tree, bounds to another cedar tree, and out of my life. And it happened again, I had my finger on the trigger and didn't have time to shoot. Well, of course, I hunted that deer. I use air quotes here for hunted him, for like the next 3 years. I was obsessed with him. Anyway, never saw him again. I never heard a tale of anybody ever seen him again. To my knowledge, I was the only one that saw him in hunting season. So that was when I was 17. So fast forward about 3 years ago when I moved back from working at the National Rifle Association at American Hunter to back home to start a freelance career. Now I'm back on this land where, I saw that deer a long time ago, 15 years or something like that before. So I'm going around to meet some of my neighbors, and there's an old farmer named Onus Jordan, who his son was the one way back when that filmed this deer a few times. And I was just going to meet him, and we were talking about deer hunting, and he asked me why I moved back here, and I said, well, I'm a deer hunter, and I just love hunting the deer around here. And he said, man, we sure saw a big one that one time, and and I said, what are you talking about? And he goes, oh, that big double drop tine. And I said, yeah, I heard, and I think I saw him. And he goes, well, he's on my wall. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, yeah, I got him on the wall. And I said, can I see? And he said, sure. So, and Onus is about 80 years old. And I went to his house, and sure enough, that big double drop time is unmistakable, was on the wall. And I, it was bittersweet. I was, you're always happy, but and at least it was a little bit of closure because I knew what happened to that deer then. And so I said, well, tell me the story. And I said, when did you get him? And he goes, oh, hell, I don't hunt. And I go, hey, I guess I never have time to hunt. I'm a farmer and a rancher. I'm like, well, who got him then? Your son? And he said, well, no, we found this deer dead. And I said, well, tell me the story. And I actually wrote about this in Peterson's Hunting I do the whitetail column there, and wrote about the concept of this story. And I said, well, how did you get him? And he said, well, it must have been, let me think. It was probably about 16 years ago. And I did the math, and it would have been 3 years after that I had seen the deer. But he said, yeah, we were riding around, saw some buzzards, thought it was a cow, a dead cow. So my ranch hand went down there in the creek and found this deer. And heck, I was going to throw him away, but my ranch hand said he was a giant. So he wound up getting him mounted, and he gave him to me, and he's on my wall. And I said, well, did you see the deer? How decomposed was it, when you found it? And he said, oh no, he looked like he'd only been dead a day or two. And I said, well, how'd he die? And he said, well, I looked him over. He didn't have any bullet holes. His teeth were plumb worn down. And holy crap, Jay, you know what that deer died of, don't you?
Old age?
He died of old age. Everybody was hunting him. Everybody knew he existed. He bred. He was at least, by the math I can figure, probably 9 years old at least. That big buck that everybody tried to hunt, everybody knew about, they knew his range, died of old age. It just goes to show, if it weren't for the rut, when big deer, big old wise deer get vulnerable, we would never probably kill them.
That's crazy.
Number 6.
Seth and Scott Perkins, episode 270.
So we have a cabin located in the southern part of Ohio. Our family is originally from that area, Belmont, Monroe County. And our father went down with our grandfather. It's not the original Perkins family farm. However, it is located in the same county, where we were able to purchase some land very, very close to the Wayne National Forest. We were able to go down, and we bought a cabin that, it's like it's a 18th century hand-hewn beam log cabin.
Wow, that's awesome.
It's super cool. In the early 2000s, we went down, we dismantled this cabin, and we rebuilt it, re-erected it on our property. So we now have a 2-story log cabin. It's got it's got a wood stove, a nice little kitchen, some running water with a cistern type system in it. But that is the place that we go where we create memories that last a lifetime. So when Scott and I first started going down there, we've grown up hunting, Scott and I together our whole lives, whether it be, from Thanksgiving morning chasing cotton-tailed rabbits to, deer hunting. So, but that place has become so special to us because, we were able to build it with our dad and our grandfather. Now our grandpa has passed on, but we can go back there now, with our kids. So the one of the memories that sticks in my mind is when the first year that we had our cabin built, our brother-in-law went with us, and he shot on opening day, a real nice 9-point buck. And I still have the image in my head of that buck hanging in a tree in front of that hand-hewn beam log cabin, and our grandfather sitting on the front porch in his orange jacket.
Nice.
So it's like the memories, just to think, that you could spend together with family doing something that you love. And if you're successful, you bring something home, that just makes it all the better.
That's awesome. Very cool.
What do you got, Scott?
Well, those are great memories. And I was just thinking about the fact that, both of us, having shot numerous deer, and one of the things for me that and obviously with the trips to the southern cabin, the family is involved, which, that's, to me, that's the biggest aspect of hunting, is the fact that we can, enjoy the tradition of hunting, and then we can pass it along to the next generation. So I think about like going out with my kids and being with them when you experience them taking their first deer. I think, at least for me, trumps any time that I've really taken a deer myself. So I think about like taking my son out and, him, being in. And so my son Brady, at the time he was only 8, but he's really big into survival and sort of outdoor lifestyle. So he had packed a backpack, and it included a field cooking kit. And in that particular hunt we were on, it was a warm day in late season. It was like around 50 degrees, and made it very easy for him to sit in the stand. But we had a button buck come in and offered a perfect shot, and he shot it, and we watched it go down, and we recovered it. But then because of where you were sitting, Seth, we actually couldn't walk out because we would have walked over top of you, and we had about 2 hours. So we field dressed the deer, and then we took the heart, and we actually set up, and we because Brady had the correct equipment for it, we cooked the heart right there in the field. And I just remember sitting there, on that, leaning on our packs, and we could have been anywhere in the world on that particular evening, and we could have been at any point in time too. We could have been 150 years ago, sans the maybe modern day equipment that we were using. But the point I'm making is that it's a timeless tradition that you absolutely, in my opinion, can't get any higher, bigger high in hunting than involving the family and not only the generations before you, like our grandfather, but the generations that are coming after you. So for me, that's cloud 9 for me.
Hey Jay, can I tell you a story about why not to take your wife hunting?
Sure.
Okay. So in 2012, I told my wife and I, we had just 2 kids at the time, and I told her, I was like, I'd like to get you into hunting, because it was something that I really enjoyed. And she had never gone before. So she's like, okay, you know, I'll give it a try this year. So that particular year, I ended up shooting a pretty decent 9-point buck on opening day archery season here in Ohio. And shortly after that, I'm talking probably 3-4 weeks later, I started getting pictures of just an absolute giant non-typical deer on this farm that I was hunting. So I told her, I said, you need to go through through your hunter's education, and you need to get your hunting license, and I need to take you hunting and try to get this deer. So she did. She went to our local fin, feather, fur outfitter. She went through the hunter's safety course on a Friday night, November 11th. I'll never forget it. She borrowed my dad's Excalibur crossbow. I set a target up for her at 30 yards. We went out. She shot. We actually climbed up onto a steel flat roof building that we have here on the farm. She shot from the roof of that building.
Nice.
She shot 3 arrows. Never shot a crossbow before. So our goal was the next morning. It was a Saturday, November 12th. I was going to take her deer hunting. So 5 o'clock in the morning, my dad comes over to watch our 2 young boys, and we climb into a double ladder stand together. And at about 7:15 or so, small button buck came through the woods, and she's like, should we shoot it? Should we shoot it? And I was like, no, let's just wait. It's too early. It's the rut here in Ohio. We got to just give it some time. Well, wouldn't you know it, at 7:45 that morning, she's like, there's a deer. And I look up, and this buck is headed right for us. Long story short, I filmed that entire hunt with my cell phone, and she shoots this deer 30 yards broadside, absolutely smokes him. At the end of the day, that deer had 18 scoreable points and scored 195 and 2/8.
Wow.
So now God taught me a little humility, because that deer's hanging on the wall, and I got to explain to every single person that comes around, and I show them my deer collection, that one's not mine.
Right.
So I'm not discouraging guys from taking their wives hunting, but just remember that could happen.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't kill that one. My wife did.
I didn't kill that one. Yeah. So
that's a great
I got to be
story.
honest about it too.
Number 5.
At number 5, Richard Cook from Cook's Fatal Attraction, episode 289.
So the one I was telling you was actually my deer scent. It was actually in 2006 when I harvested a buck here on the farm. And where my deer farm is here is actually, my deer stand is actually like 15 feet behind my house. There was no house here back in 1983. And that is where my deer stand is. And I hunted them woods. And then now that deer stand is actually in my deer pen. But anyway, to go on to that hunt there, way back in 2000, there was this buck that was just crossing the gravel roads here, and you would hear the neighbors talking. Man, did you see that buck? I'd hear them talking to my dad and stuff, and my mom, and then I would always hear a lot of this like secondhand. Boy, 2:00 in the morning, and that's what I kind of like in the back of my mind wanted to call it, like the 2:00 buck. 2:00 in the morning, he would always just come run right across the road, and you could never get a good look at him. And everybody said, that big buck out there. So I bought this place in 2002, and in that year, I bought my first trail camera, and I stuck it up. And October 23rd, I got a picture of that buck. I had never, ever seen that buck, just heard about it. And here it was just he was about 210 pounds he would have dressed, and 13 points. And I want to say he was like 20 and 3/4 inch spread on him. He has a pretty good sized deer. And that was the only picture I got of him. And then he left. And I just kept checking that, probably more than what I should have. I would say probably once a week I would go out there and check that. And granted, I only had one camera. Well, I wasn't getting his picture. So, of course, I went and bought a second camera. And I put that up. And finally, on December 10th, I got a picture of him, and he was coming out of, there's about a 3-acre low spot here with cattails, and he was coming out of there. And then I go, I bet he's bedding there. And then every day he was coming out of there, but I shouldn't say day, every night he was coming out of there. He was still holding true to that 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. That's when he would come out of there and he would head to the north. And I know he's bedded down in there. On December 10th, he showed up, and he was coming through at about 2 o'clock in the morning pretty consistently. And this year, it was kind of a wet year. The moisture content was wet, and my dad had quit farming and took a job, so he rented his land out, and there was a cornfield back here, about a 5-acre cornfield, and that buck was going to that cornfield. And but still 2 o'clock in the morning, and here I am going out when I can, usually a Saturday evening sit, and nothing. I mean, I never ever laid eyes on this deer, but I would notice, we had about 8 inches of snow. I would notice that this buck would always drag the tips of his rear hooves in the snow, and then there was a big track in there, and I was, wow, I wonder if that's him. So I moved one of them cameras to that trail of the snow, and that was him. And then later on in December, I was walking around in the snow there looking for that track, and I seen him coming out of a tamarack swamp, which is about 100 yards from that bedding area. So he had moved. He wasn't bedding. I wasn't getting him on that camera, and he had moved to this tamarack. In Minnesota here, December 31st is the last day of archery season. It was about 10 degrees out, and I went and climbed up one of my lock-on stands here, and it was pretty much a Hail Mary. I had seen that he had walked down that trail because of that dragging the back foot, and it was cold. I went out there about an hour and a half before dark, just on a long shot that, hey, he's got to be getting hungry. Went through the rut, and I could see on them last pictures that he had probably dropped about 30 pounds. So I knew he was going to need to get to that cornfield or some food source. And here I'm just freezing up there on the stand, and just waiting for, come on, get dark so I can go back to the house. And right. and I look at, I'm sitting there looking at my watch, and there's 10 minutes left. There's 7 minutes left. There's 5 minutes left. And this was a really dark colored deer. And here he come. The trail that was coming by that way was my spot in my shooting lane was 22 yards. I've already played that out 1,000 times in my head. I bet I spent 1,000 hours looking at that computer and that picture of that buck. And here he comes. First time ever, so we've been seeing this deer from the year 2000. And this is 2006. I had his sheds from 2003 that I got right behind my house. And that's kind of an interesting story. I had walked out there and I had found one side, and I had a male black lab, and I was working the night shift, and he was out there with me. I found that one side of that shed. I come back in, went to sleep. I woke up and I looked here on the deck. He had laid the other half of that shed. He knew what I was looking for, I guess. He laid the other half of that shed right on my deck. So that was a great present. But crazy. But anyway, that buck's coming, and there's 5 minutes of shooting left. And he was just coming at a slow pace. He was an older buck, and he just had his head at that one position, didn't look up, just walking real slow. And when he got to my shooting lane there at 22 yards, I pulled back my old Browning Mirage. I don't know if you know what kind of bow that is or not. I pulled that back, and I sent that beam and arrow with a thunderhead right through his lungs. And like I had said, 10 degrees. After I shot him, I was so cold. I remember looking down at the ground. I was up about 15 feet. I remember looking down at the ground, and there was probably about 8-10 inches of snow. And I was so cold, I remember thinking, I don't even want to climb down. I just wanted to jump down to the ground. Right. But how cold I was, I figured, you better not. So I shimmied down that tree, and I couldn't wait back to get back to the house here, grab my cell phone, and call my best friend, because me and him probably had 2,000 hours talking about this deer and, you know, how I was going to harvest them and stuff. I remember picking up my cell phone, and between the excitement and the freezing, I dropped it about 3 times before I could call him. And all I could say was, when I picked it up, I said, Gino, I think I got him. You better come over here. Because I didn't even go follow him. I knew it was a good hit. I didn't go follow him. It was already dark. And I just wanted to let him sit until my buddy could come out here and help me, you know, track him. And here it turns out he went about 25 yards is all that he had went. And he was laying there. He was laying there dead.
That's awesome.
168 and 5/8 inches.
That's a good buck.
He grossed.
Wow.
Which is a giant. We've got some big deer here in Minnesota or whatever, but that is really a giant for here. Most people are probably taking a 140 to a taxidermist here, you know?
Yeah. Yep. That makes sense. What a great story. That's awesome.
I actually took his jaw off and had it sent in for aging. He was 8.5 years old.
That's an old buck.
It is.
Wow. That's amazing. Very
Nice
cool.
story.
And so when he bedded in that swamp where I had said, I went back and revisited that or whatever. The next morning when it got light, I went in there. And I don't know if you ever seen these beds or not, but it was about the size of a pickup truck. And he was in a spot where he could run 360 degrees. So I knew he was there for that entire fall. And I've got a wood boiler out the back of my house that's probably only 75 yards away from that. And I remember sitting there throwing wood into my stove, and I would actually talk to that deer, or maybe I'm just crazy, but I would say, you know what? I know you're laying in that bed, but there is no way I can get to you. And either you're going to die of old age, or I'm going to stick an arrow through you, one or the other. But, you know, we're going to see where this journey ends.
Number 4.
Coming in at number 4, Anthony Stallone in episode 276.
I'll give you a perfect hunt, and it's my all-time right now favorite hunt of my life.
Okay.
And it's got to do with my kids, and it's just like when you're a dad and you see things, you picture something in your head that you practice and practice and practice, and then it all comes down and works out, and you're just like, I can't believe that just happened. This story has every aspect for it. So not last year, the year before, we both my boys drew a tag here in Arizona for Coues deer, and my younger son had shot a Coues deer the prior year with my cousin John. And you know my cousin John Stallone. I mean, he's
absolutely,
freaking.
Yeah.
He's phenomenal. He's a great hunter. He's a great guide. I mean, I can't say anything negative about the kid, just that he eats a lot. But he freaking, he just seriously, when it comes to hunting, if anybody wants to like really learn about Western hunting, I would say go look at his blog, John Stallone. I guess it's johnstallone.com. And he really does a good job of teaching. And he took my younger son, and he got him a Coues deer buck. So what was, disappointing was that my older son didn't shoot one prior to the younger son. So my older son was like, he felt like, oh, okay, my younger brother already shot a deer and I haven't. So my focus was to get him a deer first.
Yep.
So we went to Tucson, and I'll try to like make it as fast as possible. We drove up there early in the morning, woke up at like 3:00 in the morning.
Yep.
We're driving up, get to a spot that we go to that I've hunted in the past. And I kind of get to the spot and I say, hey guys, we're gonna look right here and we're gonna start looking for deer. And I tell in Arizona, we kind of, I guess I want to say, there's a lot of public land hunting. So it's not like you have a tag and there's nobody there. When you're going hunting, there's a lot of people there. And we're hunting close to the border of Mexico, so it's a little scary, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So we get to this ridge and we start glassing, and right away, and these kids, they have the best gear, and that's probably a positive and a negative to it, because they do they do kind of are a little spoiled in that way because they don't know any different. But they got great binos, so when they see something, they can see it for far away.
Right.
So
right.
both boys are. I borrowed, glass from one brother, glass from John, and I have my own. And they're glassing up deer. They're like, Dad, I have deer. And they're glassing up does. So I'm like, oh, guys, great. We got does here. We got good does there. And we hear a shot coming from the opposite side of the canyon. And I said, guys, start looking that way. Then we hear another shot, same side, opposite side of us, on the opposite side of the canyon. I'm like, guys, start looking over there. Both boys turn around, start looking, start glassing. Boom, I pick up a buck. I'm like, guys, big buck. So we start glassing this buck, and they're both on it. They and it's not easy to see these animals. We're like 1,200, 1,400 yards away. And these things, they're called the great goats for a reason, because you can see them for 1 second and they're gone the next. And I've taught them in the past to never take your eyes off the deer. Never take your eyes off the deer. Once you find it, don't take your eyes off. So they're all glassing. I'm like, all right, the deer beds down. I'm like, guys, all right, listen, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to grab the rifle, grab the packs. I get radio set up between me and my younger son, because my older son is shooter number one. And I said, listen, I'm taking Sebastian. We're going to go. And I already spotted out a spot where I ranged up a spot where I was going to go to shoot, that I can make a 400-yard shot to the next canyon where the deer was. And that's a big thing, is knowing how to approach these animals so that they're not seeing you, because they can see from way far away. So I wanted to know where I was going to set up to shoot to make sure that I had a shot at this animal, because like I said, we're 1,400 yards away. So my other son now is 11 years old, and my 12-year-old son is now coming with me to go shoot this animal. Now, like I said, we're on the border of Tucson, and we're close to the Mexico border. And I'm a little scared to leave my younger son by himself with the truck with $1,500 binos and all the gear. And I'm leaving him now so that he could stay back and watch us and watch the deer. And if my wife knew that I was doing that, she'd probably have killed me. So I'm like, listen, you stay here. Talk me through. If the deer moves, you got to let me know. I said, do not get off these binos. And he's like, Dad, I won't. So I'm like, all right, listen, go pee, do what you got to do, grab some water. After this, you're done. This is your spot. You do not leave. You do not move. You talk to me throughout the whole way. So we're on the stalk. We get ready to go on the stalk. He's talking to me. He's like, Dad, the deer's still bedded down. Okay, so me and my other son, we make it our way down to this spot. It's like 800 yards from where we're at. So we start creeping down there the whole way. I mean, we're dealing with cactus. We're dealing with jumping cholla. We're dealing with, every type of sticky type of cholla is out there. My son fell 6 times. He's bleeding out of his hands. Wow. I'm no joke. I'm not lying. And he's a trooper. He's determined to get this deer, because he knows that his younger brother already shot one. So he wants to get it. So we finally get to the spot. And at the exact moment that I get to the spot, my younger son goes, Dad, he's getting up. I'm like, holy cow. And now usually you don't have that much time. Sometimes they get up and they take off and they go opposite mountain to get more shade, or they'll just like get up for a couple seconds and rebed. So I'm like, oh my God, now I'm getting like, this may not happen after this. He already fell. I fell. I'm bleeding out of my butt right now. He's bleeding out of his hands, and we're excited, but we're like hurting. I get the tripod down. I get the rifle set up for him, and we're on our way. And I said, all right, I pick up the deer in the binos, and I get him set up on with the rifle. And I'm like, hey, do you have him? He goes, yes, I have him. He goes, and now it's not easy to find the deer in the scope, but with all the practice that we have been doing, he's able to pick up the animal in the scope. Now, a key thing that I want to say to like a lot of people is that a lot of people do something wrong with the scope. They zoom in with the scope on the deer. You have to zoom out to find the deer. You can't have it zoomed in. Yeah, it's going to be far. It may look like a little ant in the scope, but you're not going to be able to find an animal with the scope zoomed all the way in. It's just that the sight picture is too small. And a lot of people have, that's one thing that I teach is always keep it as far as possible and shoot it at like my scopes start at 4 and go to 16. Actually, in their case, it was 24. It started at 6 and went to 24. So I have them stay at 6, but I don't let them shoot at 24 because the sight picture it starts to move a lot. So I keep them at like, say about 14 to 16. So you don't see that wobble as bad. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So he zooms in on the deer, and the deer is just like putting his antlers inside the cactus. It was a Ocotillo, and he starts feeding a little bit, and I'm like, "Are you on it? Are you on it?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm on it." I'm like, "Is he broadside?" And I wanted to test them out on this because I always make sure that they know what they're doing prior to shooting. He's like, "No, Dad, he's not broadside. It's not a good shot." And that right there, number one, I was like, "All right, I'm teaching them right. They know what to do." I'm like, "Just tell me when he gets broadside." And I could see this all happening, but I'm talking to him so that he uses his brain. He knows when to make the shot. And I would say it was probably like a minute and a half later it felt like 3 hours later that he turns broadside. And I'm like, "Is he broadside?" He goes, "Dad, he's broadside. Can I take the shot?" He asked me if I could take the shot. So I'm like, "Yeah, go ahead and take the shot." Now, my kids know that we don't ever walk in the field with the bullet inside there. So
right
now he's loading around, loads around, and now he's back on. And he's like, "Can I shoot?" We should have loaded the round a little prior. Now he's not broadside again. I'm like, "Oh my God." Now I'm like sweating. I'm like, "Oh my God, is he going to get the shot? Is he going to bed down? Is he going to go over?" And I'm like, "No, take your time. Take your time." At this second, he takes his time. I'm like, "All right, now he's broadside." And he said, "Oh, Dad, is it broadside?" I'm like, "Yes, he's broadside." Now he's asking me because now he's getting a little nervous. So I'm like, "All right, are you able to take the shot?" He goes, "Dad, I got it. I'm perfect." Next thing you know, one shot. My other son from the top of the mountain sees this before I see it. And he starts yelling to me, "Dad, he got him. He got him. He got him." And he's like tumbling down the mountain because as my son shot, he kicked my binos from underneath me and I couldn't see anymore. So I got my younger son screaming and yelling like the 4th of July just went off. He's like, "He got him. He got him. He's down. He's down." And all I could see is my older son smiling at me going, "Dad, I just did it." And that moment from right there, having the younger one, talk me through making sure that the deer was, in place, telling me what's going on. The older one getting, his first deer was probably the most memorable hunt that I could ever think of. And all the practice that we did up until that point all paid off. And that doesn't even come with just shooting the rifle. That comes with learning how to use the binos, like the little guy in the back, learning how to use the radios, talking us through. I mean, these kids, they do that often enough that, when time came that we needed it, the practice paid off, I guess, in the end.
Number 3.
At number 3, Harmon Carson, episode 274.
It's anybody who knows me or has followed me or anything like that. Just about everybody knows about Jacob. And that's a buck that I hunted really, really hard. And that deer epitomizes everything that we've kind of discussed. The deer showed up on me one year in the summer, full velvet, really pretty buck. I hunted him hard, and it's a long story, so I'll try to make it a little bit brief. But
bring in some details, though. It's okay.
Yes. So the first year, I had him in the summer. He showed up like 4 or 5 times, and then he disappeared. And I was like, "Where is this deer at?" And I couldn't find him. He finally showed up the first week in November, and he was in a edge of a thicket, or there was a ridge that had a thicket that was connected to a big swamp bottom, and there was a scrape line kind of on that transition, and he kept hitting these scrapes. So that year I was trying to figure him out. And that year he was a mainframe 10 with a split G2 on the right, making him an 11. And at the time, I mean, he was a really nice buck, but he really wasn't. He did not appear to be really old. He's kind of a lanky deer. And even, as he got older, he stayed lanky. But that year he was like 138-inch deer, just a really respectable buck. And I I actually, December 12th, the deer came in and it was right at dark. He came in, checked the scrape that I was hunting, and I could see the deer, but I could not, it was late enough I couldn't see limbs. And I shot him. And when I shot, I knew something didn't quite sound right. And I looked, I couldn't find my arrow. I found blood. We blood trailed him like 200 yards. It started pouring down rain. And anyway, couldn't find the deer. And I had no clue where I hit. I just knew that there was blood on the ground and I couldn't find my arrow. And I was like, what have you done? You have messed up. And so I looked and looked and looked. 2 days later, the deer shows up on camera, checking the same scrape 20 yards from where I shot him, from 2 days before. And he had a scab on the front of his hip. I had apparently hit a limb and my arrow had deflected and stuck in his back leg. And the arrow wasn't there. He just had a hole. And so the deer started walking with a limp. Well, that's why I named him Jacob, because I thought of the story in the Bible where, Jacob wrestled with the angel and the angel touched his hip and he started limping. And so I named him Jacob. Well, I stayed with him the whole rest of the year and I never could kill him, never could catch up with him. And when he lost his velvet, it even got down, or when he lost his antlers, I had videos of him with, scabs on his head and a scab on his legs. So it was kind of cool. The following year, this is something I do in the summertime. If I'm trying to find a mature buck, I look for natural food sources. Baiting is legal here in Louisiana. So you have a lot of people putting out, corn and all kinds of other stuff that people put out. But what I try to do is I try to find deer, especially early in the summer. I try to find deer I try to find them where they like to be naturally. I don't like altering what a deer wants to do, because as soon as you get through altering it, the deer's going to move on. But if you figure out where the deer's what he's already doing, and then, you step in, then it doesn't matter what you're doing, the deer's going to be there regardless. So especially early summer or late summer, I try to find natural food sources. So there was an open area that was growing some marsh elder and some other browsing material that these deer were coming in there eating on, ragweed and such. And so I could tell that the tops of these plants are being nipped off, and I put up a camera. Well, this buck showed up on camera and he had these big old Coke cans on his head. And I was like, man, that looks like Jacob. But I never could get a picture of his hip. Well, about a week later, I finally got pictures, and there was a dark spot back where I'd shot him. And I could tell he was going to be way bigger than what he was the year before. That was the year that Louisiana was in like national news for all the flooding that we had. Right. It was 2016, just crazy amounts of flood. And anyway, so this deer came in and he started hanging out, and I was just trying to pick him apart. I put in multiple cameras in that area. I rely heavily on trail cameras, just because we don't have open areas where we can sit back and glass them, like a lot of people are able to. So I do my glassing with my trail cameras. I get into these thickets, try to figure out where the deer are, and I leave my cameras up and back out, and try to, figure them out that way. So throughout the summer, I was doing that, trying to figure out the details of this deer. And what I was doing is I was taking what that deer was doing that year, basing it against all of the patterns and pictures I had from him from the year before, and trying to figure out some sort of a movement pattern, areas he was liking to come from, where he was staying, where he was feeding. And so I was just really trying to pay a whole lot of attention to my trail cameras. And I leave most of my trail cameras on video, because it tells me more information. Instead of a deer just being in front of the camera, it tells me how the deer walks into the camera. So just because the deer's coming in from the left doesn't mean that he's walking directly in from the left. He might be coming in from an angle, and depending on where that transition is, that could be, if you're trying to back trail him, that could lead you into two completely different areas. So I leave my cameras on video because of that. So I was able to keep up with this deer all summer. And as the summer developed or went on, this deer developed into just a brute, just a insanely large animal for this area. Biggest deer I've had on camera. And so he wound up disappearing on me. September 4th, he shed his velvet, and I got pictures of him standing in front of my camera with velvet hanging off of his antlers. And that was the last picture I had of that deer. He disappeared on me for like 3.5 weeks. And I was freaking out. Part of the problem is we have, this is something we hadn't discussed, but we have a massive hog problem down here in Louisiana. And it affects your ability to pattern big bucks a lot of times.
Yep.
Deer in general don't seem to mind hogs, but I mean, they do, but it doesn't affect them as much as what it affects mature bucks. Mature bucks put up with a big group of hogs. When hogs move in, big bucks move out typically.
Okay.
And that's what happened. These hogs moved into this area and the deer just disappeared. I'm like, where did this deer go? And anyway, September comes along. October 1st is coming up really quick. That's when our bow season starts. So 4 days before season, I'm like, this is the deer I've got that I'm hunting. I had some other respectable bucks on camera, but again, this is the biggest deer I'd ever seen. And I was putting every bit of effort I had into that deer. And so I hadn't seen him in 3.5 weeks, but based on everything that I had learned from the year before, and based on everything that I had watched him do throughout the summer, I made a game plan and kind of decided on where I wanted to hunt, and hung a stand 4 days before season opened. So season actually opened on a Saturday that year. And so the Thursday before, I went in, did a little bit of scouting right then. And again, there was nothing. I had not had camera pictures of this deer in 3.5 weeks. There wasn't anything there other than there was a bottom, a cypress bottom, and there were some ridges. And I found where there was some oak trees that were dropping acorns early. And normally it was like season wasn't even open, and the oaks were dropping. And so I could tell there had been some deer in there eating, and there was one set of really big tracks. And it was kind of like if you were to draw circles over his rut activity from the year before and his summer activity from the year I was hunting, and where the circles overlapped was kind of where those oak trees were. And I was like, this kind of makes sense. And so I put a camera up and hung my stand. And when I went in Saturday morning to hunt, I pulled out my card, put it in the card reader, climbed the tree, strapped myself in, and sat down. And when I start flipping to the camera, that buck had showed up. He apparently had been down in that area in the edge of that thicket, and I hadn't been messing with that spot. But he showed up on camera in broad daylight the day before season opened. And I hadn't seen him in 3.5 weeks. I just, I hung the stand and the camera based on a gut feel from all the information I'd gathered, and it just, it worked out. I was right where I needed to be. And so 3 days go by. The wind was swirling really, really bad, and like it would be perfect. I'd go in, sit the stand. I'd be sitting in the stand, and the wind would swirl, and it was just I never could get a consistent wind, and it was driving me crazy because of the way the ridges and everything were, being on the edge of this flat bottom. And I had hogs come through. I had other deer come in, and it seemed like almost everything was spooking, and it was driving me crazy because I'm like, I'm about to mess up. This is not where I need to be. This is where I need to be, but the wind isn't working with me. And well, that was a Saturday. The following, I think it was Tuesday evening, I went and hunted, and I had a strong, consistent wind, and I slipped in, I hunted, and right before, about an hour before dark, that buck comes walking out of the cypress trees, and I managed to shoot him, and he scored 172 and was
wow.
a 9-point mainframe 9 with a split G2 on his right, making him a 10. But just a phenomenal buck. I broke my 140-inch goal with a trad bow with him. So he was just it was phenomenal, man. That deer, and I managed to get it all on film, and it was just I don't know, that deer kind of changed a lot of stuff, or not changed. It kind of epitomized my journey, I guess, if you want to call it that, from learning, finding a mature buck, trying to figure out a mature buck and sticking with that one deer and figuring out how he moves through your area. And I've done that. I've killed several really nice bucks doing it that way. It's not always my target buck that I kill. But again, when you are hunting like that, you're putting yourself in buck spots. So a lot of times I'm hunting low odds deer spots, but high odds buck spots, meaning that when I hunt, I might not see many deer, but the deer I see are more than likely going to be bucks. And so, I put myself in a situation where, it was really, really high chance the deer was going to show up, and he did. And it all worked out for me.
Number 2.
At number 2, Allison Rauscher, episode 288.
So I had hunted that morning, and I knew it was going to be an interesting day and probably a good day for movement because it was actually snowing here in Wisconsin. By the time that I was in my stand, I think we had probably got about 2 inches of snow already. I mean, wow. There was a heavy layer like within the woods, which made it gorgeous walking in early in the morning, when it's still dark. But, man, you can really see in the woods when there's snow on the ground.
Oh, yeah. Snow and deer hunting is the best.
It is. It's, which, you have, it's like a love-hate relationship because it's so beautiful. But, oh, my goodness, you get cold quick if you don't have the right equipment.
Right. But, boy, do the deer stick out.
Yes, that too. And that's kind of, I think, what ultimately helped my situation. I think that's what really got the buck on its feet earlier too.
Yep.
Because, I mean, the snow was coming down all day long, and I think it stopped probably around 3 o'clock or so. And then I spotted him at 5 o'clock. But anyway, so I walked in the snow, and like I said, there was a heavy layer already, like just on the trees and on the ground. And so I sat the stand in the ditch in the morning, and all I saw was a spike. I didn't see much of anything. And like I said, the snow was still coming down, and I sat there till about 10 o'clock. And then I decided to head out, and that's kind of when my dad came around and moved the stand, but it was still snowing, so I kind of was like, I don't think anything's going to really move during the day with the snow falling still.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, I was like, rut's not in full swing. It's still really early, and I really think if they would have been moving, it would have been late morning. And I didn't see anything. So, I waited. I actually ended up just like staying at the property, and I slept in my car, took a little nap. And then, I went in around 2:30, and it kind of, it eased up a little bit, and I was in the stand. Yeah, no, I was in the stand by 2:30, and then it stopped snowing around 3 o'clock. And, so then I probably waited another hour or so, and all of a sudden I saw a doe and a nubbin buck come in, and along with a little 8-pointer that was following behind him, and he was grunting at him and chasing him around, and finally he took off on his own, and the doe and nubbin buck just kind of hung around and milled around, and they were eating, and so I got busy watching them just because that's half the fun for me, is just being able to watch the deer like that. I just love watching them.
Oh, yeah, it's a thrill. I mean, just to see their behavior and their mannerisms, see what they're going to do next and how they interact with each other. It's fascinating.
Yeah, well, and just like the different, you can tell, like just their, like you said, their mannerisms and their behaviors, like certain things they'll do that it almost alerts you that like, oh, okay, there's another deer coming, or there. It's just cool to see how they interact with each other. But I was having fun just watching them, and about an hour goes by, and all of a sudden I turn around because I could see the doe like kind of picked her head up and like looked over across the flat, and it was like a sudden like head or like a whiplash almost. And so I looked over where she was looking, and sure enough, here's this buck walking in, and my heart just starts going out of my chest. Like, I was like, oh crap, like, okay, I need to be ready. So, and I had already had my bow in my hands because I knew, like, as soon as that snow stopped, I knew there were going to be deer on their feet, and I knew they were going to be moving. And I just felt like every second's going to count here.
What time of day was this again? This was
5 o'clock. 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
5 o'clock. You're in your stand. How far away is the buck at this point?
At that point, he was probably 50, 60 yards.
60 yards. And what degree was it? Like, was it 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock?
Oh, he was at like 10 o'clock. 10
o'clock. Okay, so
but he was in that thick stuff that I was referring to.
So if you're sitting in your stand facing out, he's a little bit to your left in the thick stuff. You can see him moving around about 60 yards out. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So he starts walking in towards me, and he hits one of the scrapes, which was incredible to watch him do. Like, because up until that point, like that season, I had just seen a bunch of like little bucks hitting scrapes, and just to see a deer of that size hit that scrape was like just really, really cool. So then he starts walking in, and he kind of looks like he's about to skirt around me and just kind of stay in that thick brush. And so I grunted at him a couple of times, and he just comes to a dead stop, doesn't move a muscle, is just still as can be. And he's still like that for probably a good 2-3 minutes. And I kept telling people it was 5 minutes, but I'm sure it probably felt like 5 minutes, but was really probably 2.
It's astonishing how long they can hold a pose. It is.
Oh my goodness. And not move a single muscle. And I think that almost made it worse for me, because then I could hear how loud my heart was, and my stomach started going. I hadn't really eaten anything during the day, and I was just like, oh, this buck is going to hear my heart. He's going to hear my stomach. He's going to take off. Like, I could not get myself to just like calm down. And I was going through and having a self-talk, and was just like, get it together. Like, this is not the time to mess this up.
That's funny. Do you remember the grunt sequence that you used?
I don't.
Okay.
It's all a blur. Like,
right.
Seriously, I think it was like 3 short grunts. Like, I remember, I didn't do a whole lot of them. I just did like 3 short ones, I think. And I think that was also the case because I wanted to get my grunt tube down so I could hook up. Like, I mean, at that point, after he hit the scrape and he was where he was at, he had closed the distance to 30 yards.
Okay. How far away was the scrape?
Probably at 40.
Okay. So he's coming towards you, and is it still thick in there, or is it starting to open up?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was literally walking like the thick area just kind of lined the ridge, and he was just sticking right in that. Like, he was sticking right next to it, and actually after hitting the scrape dipped back into it. And so I mean, even at 30 yards, like, I didn't have a shot at him. And I was thinking, like, great, he's going to skirt right around me, and he's going to dip back down the hill, and that'll be the last I see of him.
As they usually do. Yeah.
Yep. So that's why I let out those 3 grunts, or however many I did. I know they were short grunts, but I couldn't tell you like how many and how separated they were, So he's still as can be. Well, then that nubbin buck ends up coming up onto the flat and comes up just within view of that buck, and that buck starts coming and walking towards that nubbin buck. And they're now almost dead left of me at like a straight angle, straight away. And I was like, okay, there's a tree to my left that has branches coming out. And I was like, either I'm about to put an arrow in a tree, or if he walks into this spot where there's an opening, I can probably get my arrow through there.
Okay.
I was like, but I was thinking, I was like, I got to be ready. Like, I need to draw back as soon as he steps behind this other tree ahead of it. And once he steps into that spot, I just need to let that arrow fly. And so sure enough, he ended up walking towards me and jumped this log and stepped right into that spot. And as soon as he stepped into that spot and opened up his shoulder, I just hit my trigger, and the arrow flew right through that area and hit him right in the it actually hit him like, man, just right above the shoulder. I would say it was still in the shoulder blade. It cut through the shoulder blade and went down through his heart.
Yeah.
And then out his armpit on the right side.
Gotcha. So it's almost like it. How high up were you? About 20?
I was
15.
I'd say about 15.
Gotcha. So and he was 30 yards
and
out when you shot, or
no. He had at that point he had come to about 15 yards.
So he's at 15 yards. You're 15 feet up. So you got a pretty sharp angle at that point.
Yeah.
And you're coming
so like
down on the shoulder blade. Yeah, I see. I see what you're saying.
Yeah. Yep. So it went straight down through him and straight out the bottom of his armpit. And but the arrow itself had broken about maybe halfway, so I could see the fletching sticking out of his shoulder blade, but I couldn't tell. I mean, he donkey kicked right away and took off, and I couldn't really tell what kind of penetration I got. And I had actually had a really bad experience last season where I was so confident that I shot a deer similar to him, and I was confident that I had a perfect shot on him and I was going to find him. And because the year previously had ran about 50 yards, swayed like he was going to drop, and then took off and kept running. And 400 yards of blood later, I never found him. And anyway, so I was like, after seeing my arrow sticking out of this deer, my heart plummeted, and I was just, doubting myself all over again and just kind of preparing myself for that anguish. But I saw him run downhill and lost sight of him. So that was the initial impact anyway.
Gotcha. And just a side note, I know many a good hunter that have taken those shots and that you described, thought they had the kill, and that buck lived. And not only did it live, but it lived years beyond that, because the pictures of that same buck years later with the hole that had since healed over. And so it happens. It happens a lot, actually. It happens more than you think. But they actually can take a pass through and keep on going. It's amazing what they can do.
Yeah, I noticed you interviewed Blake Garrett not too long ago.
That's right.
Yeah. So him and I were talking because he was showing me pictures the night that he shot his buck Dirty, and he had shot him the year prior and wasn't able to kill him. And he said after he shot him this year, he sent me a video of like when he was actually field dressing him.
Yep.
His lung had collapsed. One of his lungs that he hit, he had one lung to him. It collapsed and it almost fused to the side of his rib cage. And it's just like that deer was basically living on one lung.
Right.
And so, I mean, it's heartbreaking, but like I said, I mean, it's amazing what those deer can live through and what those bucks can survive. And
they're tough,
tough creatures. Nobody ever wants that to happen. And anybody that knows me and followed that story knows I was just beating myself up about that experience for the past year. And so to have it come down this year and have almost the exact same thing happen, it was just like my confidence plummeted. I just was beside myself, and I just didn't know, because I didn't see him drop myself.
Yep.
that, like with my own eyes, that I just doubted myself completely.
It is amazing how psychological those experiences for a hunter play in, because you're right, it creates self-doubt. It tears you up, like you feel so bad because you do care about these animals a lot, and the last thing that you really want is you don't want to inflict long-term pain on these animals. You want it to be quick and easy and done.
Yeah. You don't want them to suffer.
Right.
Yeah.
But just talking to more and more hunters, that these pass-through shots are like a mosquito bite sometimes. These things. They're like, oh, what was that? God, and then they heal up, and then they're running around, rutting all over the place the next year, doing exactly the same things. And they took an entire arrow through their mid cavity. How is that possible? Yeah. But it's astonishing. So I think there's some comfort in knowing that these things are so tough that they can take a blow like that and still survive long beyond the shot. So it's hard to take, and you feel really bad because you think the worst. But in reality, it's like a mosquito bite, I guess, is what it comes down to in a lot of these pass-throughs where they do continue to live on. Otherwise, you would have found the deer.
Yeah. And my dad kind of tried to comfort me by saying, it happens to everybody. And if it's not, then they're not taking the shots or they're liars.
Right. That's right.
So.
Yep. I mean, I don't know a hunter alive that has not especially with an arrow, that has killed or shot and killed every single deer that they shot at.
Yeah. Yep.
Or shot at and hit and thought they had to kill and didn't. I mean, it's happened over and over and over.
Yeah.
And to me too. I mean, it's happened to me. A few times, and it's just you don't love the scenario. It's the worst feeling in the world. But pretty guaranteed that those deer lived because they're tough. They're built for survival. They don't know that they shouldn't survive. They have no idea. They just keep on going. But they also have this incredible ability to heal with extremely high levels of vitamin K, which is like the ultimate vitamin for closing. And you would probably know this, right, from being in the medical field. The level of vitamin K is off the charts, so they clot quickly, and if you don't take out a vital, then they keep on going.
Yep. Yeah.
So, amazing story, Allison.
Thank you. Yeah, it's crazy how it all came together, and it was overwhelming when I finally did find him. And not that it definitely wasn't a long track job by any means, but I think what really made it was when my dad came to see him and help me drag him out. And I think just sharing that with my dad was definitely the best part of it.
Number 1.
And finally, to round out the best deer hunting stories of 2019 on the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunt Podcast, Phil Vanderpool in episode 279.
Well, okay. This right here is in my backyard, basically, right here at home. And this is a buck that I nicknamed Obsession. It actually started in 2015. I had 2 trail camera pictures, of which I don't have anymore because it was on an old computer and they crashed. A buck that I got in late season. I got 2, of course, they were nighttime photos of pictures of this big, huge 8-point frame buck. And, I thought, man, that's a good deer. Well, coming into 2016, I never had any more prior history of him in 2016, other than I had a friend later on in 2016. We got 1 trail camera picture of him. And from where that trail camera picture and where I'd got it in 2015 is probably, I don't think it's a mile apart. So I thought, God, this deer is something else. This buck Obsession, 2016 going into 2017, I had the 1 trail camera picture in 2016. I didn't know if somebody killed the deer. It seemed like he fell off the face of the earth and wasn't getting any more trail camera pictures. Come into 2017, I went down to this property that where I killed my first Propin young whitetail. And I put a bunch of trail cameras out down there, which is about, I'm just going to make a long story short again, about 3 miles probably from where I got that trail camera picture in 2015. Okay. I put some cameras out down there because during turkey season, I saw 2 bucks. And I hadn't hunted the property in quite some time because the landowner had actually let a couple of the guys hunt in there some. And it just seemed like they were shooting everything they could see. And I was a little more about management, trying to take care of the deer a little better as far as that goes. But I kind of quit hunting the property. But during turkey season, I was driving through there and I saw 2 bucks, and one of them, this was in April, and he already had big, huge knobs on his head. And I thought, boy, I hadn't been back in here in a while, and I'd had a tree stand stolen off the property back there a few years before that. And so I thought, I haven't been back in a while. I'm going to go back in there. Of course, I double-checked to make sure I still had permission, and obviously I did. So I went in there, and I hung these trail cameras up. Well, I didn't check the cameras until I went back in there, and I guess it was in August. And I'd hung one up, and I'd put it in video mode. And lo and behold, I got this gigantic 8-point, which I knew as soon as I seen it, I thought, that's that same buck. And that's that same buck from 2015 and 2016. That's obsession. No kidding. And this deer, I just about flipped out when I seen it. It was daytime, and I don't know if he had been pushed off another piece of property or what, but there was other bucks with him, but he was in the lead quite a ways ahead of these other bucks. And I got this trail camera video of him, and I about flipped out. I said, oh my gosh, this deer. And I said right then, now the game has changed. This deer, I thought, I may be in his bedroom. Maybe this is where this deer's been staying this whole time. And I just got fortunate late season in December there to get a couple trail camera pictures of him, probably looking for the last few does or something, I'm holy cow. Long story short, Rhonda and I, that's my wife. Yep. Her and I started putting these trail cameras out. We put some blinds out, and I started running those cameras. Well, I didn't get any more pictures of that deer in 2017. I didn't get any more pictures of him. I thought, golly, until the 23rd day of December. And this is no lie. I had a covert cell camera up. I had a ground blind down there, and I had got up early. I don't know why. I hadn't even hunted this blind yet. And I got up. I thought, I'm going to go to that blind this morning. And I got up at cold front, moved in. It was cold and temperature was really cold. And I thought, boy, this would be a good time to go get in that blind. Well, just as I was getting in my truck, my covert cell camera went off. And lo and behold, Obsession was standing in front of that blind.
The blind you're going to hunt.
The blind I was going to hunt. And I'm like, oh my gosh. But here's the situation. If I'd have went in there, I would have probably bumped him then. That may have.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so that held me up from going in there. Now I went in there and hunted it another time or two. And I passed up a couple other bucks, but I didn't have him. Well, I think it was on January 2nd, covert camera went off, and there he stood, just breaking. I mean, not even enough. Probably wasn't even shooting light. You know how the black and white pictures are showing those coverts, and it's just, you could tell it's barely starting to break. Well, anyway, there he stood. He had already shed his right side. I'm like, I was just, and after the course of that, I started getting a few more visible pictures of him and stuff there. And I'm thinking, gosh, maybe this is his area. And there was a big, huge thicket back in there. And I thought, I have got to stay there. I bet anything that's his bedding area. Mm-hmm. Well, okay. I waited till I think it was about, let's see, I'm trying to think. No, let me back up here. I'm getting ahead of myself. Yeah. Well, you remember I told you I got that first daylight photo video of him going through there. Well, when I seen that, that's when I went back in there and I thought, I got to scout this out and see what's going on here. That's when I found the sheds, both sides, I found one side of his shed from 2016. I found one side of his shed, and I thought, oh, gosh, I'm in the ballpark. Well, I searched and searched for that other one, but I thought, man, I can't just – I think I may have found his bedroom or where he's starting to call home here again. So I backed out, and I didn't go back in there, obviously, and then we're going back into December 23rd.
Yeah.
I tiptoed around in there, tried to hunt him a little bit, but for the main part, I had all my schedules lined out, to hunt the Midwest. I'd already had my schedules. And I thought, gosh, somebody probably killed him. And then when he showed up December 23rd, because we have a long hunting season. Our archery season is probably the longest in the nation, from that last week of September all the way into February 28th is our archery season.
That is long. That is really long.
It's way too long. They need to shorten it up and not run it into February, but that's another story. So anyhow, I had to quit hunting because obviously he shed the one side. I went in there that summer. I looked and I've looked and I've looked, and I did not find any of his sheds. I went in there one day and Rhonda and I went in there. We found some other sheds off some other bucks, but never found anything of obsession right off the bat there. And then I went back. That was in turkey season when we were kind of shed hunting right there in turkey season, scouting and stuff. Well, I went back in because I left my trail cameras out. Just so you know, I put 14 trail cameras out on that 100 acres of property, and just left them out basically the whole year on trails where I thought he'd, come through the thicket or different areas of the properties. Well, when I went back in there in August, I had one trail camera picture because I didn't know there again if he survived, what had happened to him, if he'd left the area. One trail camera picture, July 22nd. And there he was just walking through real fast. I don't know there again if it's something, if it'd been jumped up or what had happened, but I got one trail camera. Well, that let me know that he was still alive. That was July 22nd. And that was the only trail camera picture. And I thought, and then it looked like in the picture, you could tell he had went from a mainframe 8 from 2015, 16, and 17 being a mainframe 8. Now it looked like I thought, could that be? Could he have went to a 10 point? And I thought, well, maybe it's just as fast as he went through there, because the picture wasn't real clear. It was clear that you could tell, obviously it was him and it was his frame, but it was a little bit blurry because he'd walked through there so fast, but I thought, boy, it looked like maybe he's a 10 point. Well, I never had any more trail camera pictures. I had 3 cell cameras on the property going. And boy, nothing. And I was sick. Well, I'm in Nebraska. It's September 14th. I'm in Nebraska hunting up there. My cell camera goes off here at home. And lo and behold, there he was walking through the food plot that Rhonda and I had put in back there. We put us a little hunt plot back there in a corner of an old growed up field. I mean, done it all by hand and trimmed it and everything. And there that son of a gun was walking through there. I about fell over when I saw how big it was. And I was like, oh my gosh, this may be a game changer. And he showed up again that night, and I've got like 3 right in front of the camera. He showed up again that night, and he was right in front of the camera, and you could just see how big he was. And his velvet strips of velvet was dried, but it was still hanging off. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this deer is something else. And where we put this food plot, I had a stand in there. You could see where my old pegs was in there, where I told you somebody had stolen my tree stand. Yep. They didn't get the old pegs because the pegs had growed into the tree, but they had stolen the stand.
Gotcha.
And I don't know who that was. It's probably somebody had just no telling. I hadn't had any trouble since. I don't know what the situation was, but anyway, that's a mere 50 yards from where I got that first trail camera of obsession. Well, right there where he walked through is where I had just hung a new muddy tree stand there and set everything up, and he had walked right by it and walked right through the edge of that food plot. And I was like, gosh, this is September 14th. So, man, I knew when I got back. Well, when I got back in October, that's where I was tiptoeing around. I was hunting the ground blind and everything. The neighbors, I knew that the neighbors across the road there, I knew they knew that he was there. There was too much activity going into this old lock and key back in there, and I knew some guys were back in there hunting, and I was like, oh my gosh, everybody knows that deer's there. I bet he's showing up on their cameras and stuff. And
right.
well, he started coming to the food plot more, and I started actually. We're in September 1st here. We're allowed to start feeding here where I'm at, and I started putting some big time feed out in that food plot, and I think he was coming to the sunflower seeds late, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. But long story short, he started frequenting, but it was all still nocturnal. All nocturnal stuff that I was getting. And the first picture I got in September 14th, he was traveling pretty hard, and it was 8:14 in the morning or 8:15 in the morning on September 14th. He was traveling through there pretty quick, and I was lucky. I felt like that camera picked him up. I felt very fortunate, but because that's about 33 yards and where he was standing is probably about 30 yards from where he was traveling up through there. But that camera picked him up that far away, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I felt fortunate, but I started putting my time in, tiptoeing around, trying to hunt him. I still wasn't. He would show up the one evening that I was going to go hunting, and my nephew called me, said, Uncle Phil, I got a ball game tonight, and he's a senior in high school and one heck of a ball player. He's like 6'6".
Yep.
And so I said, all right, we're coming to the game, buddy. So I went there to watch his game. And wouldn't you know that when I pulled into the parking lot there at the gym, my phone went off, and there what session was in the daylight, standing right under my muddy tree stand.
Of course.
Oh my gosh, the one and only time, because you guys got to understand, it's 3.5 years, and that's the first time that's ever happened. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I started putting my time in, but muzzleloader season was getting close. We opened up, and I'm shortening it up here for y'all, but I was wanting Rhonda to hunt him as well as I do. And she said, nope. She said, you've put all these years into this deer, and you're going to hunt that deer. And she had just started hunting, by the way, just so you know.
Okay.
Rhonda had just started hunting the late season. She killed her first buck with a crossbow, and that hunt's going to be that hunt. Will air. No, it's already. I'm sorry, it's already aired. We already aired that hunt. She killed her first buck with Cam-X crossbow in December, right there, and she had started hunting. And I was wanting her. I was really honestly wanting her to shoot Obsession. And she told me, she said, I'm not worthy of that deer. I have not put my time in. I've not put my time in yet, and I don't think it's right for me to go kill that deer. I said, it don't matter. We're doing it together. I'll video you. Nope, she wouldn't have no part of it.
No kidding.
So I said, all right, I'm going to go kill this deer. I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to self-video. I'm going to do everything I can. October 20th, I went in 2 hours before daylight, going in on the dirt road to where the property, the main, it's a county road that separates the two properties. I met the guys going in. It's opening day of muzzleloader season. Well, we have to wear hunter orange.
Yeah.
And I'm shortening all this up, but I was going into the stand. I'm going in 2 hours early. Well, the guys must have had the same idea as I did. I'm like, oh boy. Well, I'm competing. I'm bow hunting, and they're muzzleloading hunting.
Right.
And
right.
I've got my hunter orange on. I had Rhonda drop me off. I wanted to walk in. I wanted to and get in there as early as I could. This is an all-day set. Well, long story short, I sat there all day. He had been there. I don't think he had showed up that night, but the day before he had showed up. So I knew that he might possibly be in the area.
Yeah.
So I got in the stand, and I sit there now. I mean, this is 2 hours before daylight. I sit there and I can hear some deer out in front of me in the little bitty hunt plot there, the food plot and stuff. I can hear some, activity. Of course, I can't see anything, and I still don't know what went on there. However, I did have a buck or two come up and show up on the cell camera, because I had a cell camera there. Well, long story short, there again, I sat there all day, had some interaction, still nothing to do with that, with, nothing with him. No shots, though. That was a good thing. I didn't hear any shots that morning. No, anything closed. And I'm thinking, well, nobody's shot him yet. You know, I'm thinking
Right.
there's still a chance.
Isn't that funny
Well,
how we
gets down-
count shots? Like, I wonder. Yeah.
I mean, everything I'm, you know, and I'm passing up these little bucks that's coming through. I think I had 3 or 4 different encounters, and finally it's that last hour, that last hour. And there again, I've been there all day long, and this is early, you know, I mean, still getting enough daylight. I've been there 12, 14 hours. I don't know, in that tree stand, and then I didn't even take anything to eat because I didn't want anything to interrupt my
right
hunting. So I'm sitting there and I've got cameras setting out everywhere, trying to video myself. I got my ritual, my elite ritual bow hanging there, and I'm just sitting there, and all of a sudden I hear a muzzleloader shot right up above me up there. It just about, I jumped plumb out of my seat, and I'm sitting there and I'm going, you gotta be kidding. You gotta be kidding. And then I'm sitting there and I just had this, sick feeling come over me. And I thought, oh my gosh, somebody's killed him. Right. And about that time, I heard another one went off. It was time that they probably had reloaded.
Yeah.
I thought, oh my gosh, what's going on here? And I could tell that second shot, they probably had walked up. It sounded like it had more or less probably walked up and finished the deer off.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, oh, that's it. I was just sitting there, and I sat there for about 10 minutes, just, and I grabbed my dual grunt call, my stretch back, and I don't know. I hadn't even tried to call or do anything. I was just trying to be
staying positive.
Surprise, if you will, on that deer. Yeah. I was just thinking anything that I'd done would probably spook him off. Well, I just grabbed the call and I just hit it about 5 or 6 times, just I've drawn out a couple long ones, short ones, and I just hung it back up and sat there, and I said, yeah, I'm just sick. And I don't remember, I had turned the camera on or something there and doing something, and I'd looked at a camera, and I was going to say something like, man, I'm sick. I'm thinking that, you know, I think somebody may have just shot him, you know, and about that time, I caught a little flash or something out of the corner of my eye, and I hadn't done hardly any trimming. I didn't want him to see me up in that stand, and I caught a little bit of movement, and then I looked, and about that time, he just stepped out, and it was him. And that was the first time I'd seen him, and he's, at that time when I first seen him, he's probably 15 yards, and that little food plot is in a V shape, so it's real narrow where he came out, and he's coming from right to left, and he comes out there, and I nearly fell out of the stand. I said, oh my God, he really does exist. That was the first thing I'm thinking. He really does exist. Is this true? And he stepped out there, and then I saw just how big he was, and I was like, this can't be happening. And I mean, I had 2 SLR cameras, one above me and one out in front of me there. I'm trying to turn on there, and I guess I hit them too fast because I didn't get either one of them on. I had the power on, but I think I hit the record button too fast, so they didn't come on. But I had my big camera there on the arm and base there, and I had it on, and then I had my Tacticam, which was on my bow. I had 2 of them, one running at me and one running at the deer, so I had them on. So I managed to get all this stuff on, and I've really not got time to shake because now I'm concentrating. He's walking out in the plot, and he's quartering away hard, and he's up there, and I'm thinking, gosh, do I take this shot? I mean, I'm grabbing my bow, and I pull back, and I'm thinking, and I'm sitting there, and I'm holding it, and my pin's right where I'm wanting to just angle it up. You know, he's hard quartering. I'm thinking, he's 25 yards away. Can I make this shot? And I'm thinking, I can make this shot. I can make this shot. And I'm thinking, if he turns, what if he just takes off, starts walking real fast? I may not ever get that shot. I mean, here he's still. Well, I decided to let that. I got that old Victory Vap arrow there with that slick trick, Raptor trick broadhead. I mean, I can still see it to this day. Leave my bow, and that knockout lighted knock. It went right in, but to this day, even looking at it slow motion, I'm not sure, but he was quartering so hard. I must have if it's angling down in, because I'm shooting down up, I'm pretty high there and I'm shooting down through there. All I can remember is when I shot and it hit him, he just goes down right there. He went down and I'm like, what just happened here? I'm thought, holy cow. I knew that I'm looking at him and he's down on the ground there. And of course I'm trying to grab another arrow, and get it into him. And by then he's over in front of I've got a covert cell cam over there on the other side of me, facing back toward me there. And by then he's over there almost under there and he's trying to get up and I get another arrow. And by then he's there just laying there and I shoot. I went ahead and I had a perfect shot. He's like 33 yards there. I went ahead and stuck another arrow in him. By then though, he was already expired. And I thought, well, because I knew obviously I didn't hit the backbone. To this day, I do not know what that arrow did, but it went in him. And when I got down, to make a long story short, the arrow was perfect up in the vitals, up in his lungs there. It angled perfectly, but the only thing I can think of is it must have hit something and just, deflected off a backbone or something in there to drop him in his tracks like that. Right. Because by the time the second arrow got to him, he was already done, and that's probably a period of 8-10 seconds. Wow. But here I was hysterical. and I was. I totally loved it. This is a deer that I have had history with for almost 4 years. Right. 3.5 years and all I've ever seen is covert trail camera pictures of him, mainly everything nocturnal. And the deer of a lifetime. And I knew that he was absolutely ginormous. I've never seen a deer in my area that big to this day. I've never seen a deer like him. But long story short, there again, I called Rhonda. No, let me back up. I get a text, and I'm sitting here, and I'm just flipping out. And I'd called TJ, and him and I were having our moment. I couldn't even talk. I was choked up. I was crying. I was bawling. I couldn't hide this. My emotion was so over. I couldn't control my emotion. I was teetotally just lost after I shot him. I was shaking and my voice was quivering. I couldn't hardly talk and tears running down my eyes. Yeah. Of course, it was of joy. And then I get a text from Rhonda and she said, "Did you just shoot Obsession?" I'm like, what? Did she hear me yelling from plumb up there at the house, which is about a mile up the hill or, 3/4 of a mile? Yeah. And I was like, so I called her, and of course, I was going to call her there, and I said, "How did you know?" And she said, "Well, the covert cell camera just went off. He's laying in front. There's a big buck laying in front of it." No way. The covert had. She said there's 4 pictures. She said there's you, then there's Obsession standing there, then it's you drawing your bow, and then and the arrow impact, and then there he is laying there in front of the camera. That's insane. The covert camera had caught 4 pictures of that whole scenario. There I am in my Hunter Orange, which nobody can say I was. You know how a lot of guys, you hear them say, "I'll take my orange with me and I'll put it on." Yes, right. This caught the whole action. So that's undeniable. The whole shot, everything. And it was so cool that they caught that. And it went right to her phone because we got both our numbers in there where it sends the photos from her camera. Right. But it's so special because this deer really got Rhonda and I hunting together. This deer created something, a passion within her. Right. And here she is, 55 years old, and shot her first buck that following week, prior, or well, back in January, actually. She had shot her first buck ever and shot it with that Camex crossbow, got her started hunting because the covert cameras, when I was gone, she would go run them and look at them. And then we got her on the cell cameras. She got so interested in it. She said, "Honey, I think I'd love to shoot a big buck." But anyhow, my granddaughter got her. She started when she was 2 years old, when this whole thing started with Obsession. She started going with me checking the covert cell cameras in the summertime, and we kind of made it our little event. And then we got putting our blinds out and trimming shooting lanes for our tree stands, and putting feed and mineral and stuff like that out for the deer. That it created a family bond within my granddaughter, my better half Rhonda, and myself, and got her started hunting. But it was all because of obsession. This big deer created this. I feel like the good Lord brought that deer into our lives for a reason, because Rhonda and I had struggled and went through some hard times, separated and stuff there, and got back together after all this. And we are so, everything we do, it's just like we got a second chance in life.
Thanks to all the guests for joining us here on the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast over the year. And I also wanted to thank you for tuning in and giving us your ear for an hour plus every couple weeks so that we can share a cool deer story, and hopefully you get something out of it to enhance your life, to help you enhance your time in the woods, be more efficient, be more effective. And you know what? I think 2020 is going to be a great year. We appreciate you, and hopefully you appreciate us as well. And cheers. We'll see you in 2020.